At 5:30 every morning, before the sun decided whether it wanted to show itself, Nia Carter was already awake. Not because she loved mornings, but because the world had trained her to be ready before anyone demanded it. Her room, tucked behind the mansion's kitchen corridor, always felt slightly colder than it should have, as if comfort didn't belong there. She dressed in silence, slipping into the black and white uniform designed to erase personality. Every button was checked, every crease smoothed. In the mirror, she saw a woman in her late 20s with tired eyes that still held a careful brightness. Nothing about her appearance could invite criticism. She had learned that perfection was armor. The mansion swallowed sound. Glass walls stretched high, marble floors gleamed without warmth, and the air smelled expensive in a way that felt intentional. It wasn't a home, it was a display. Nia moved through it like a shadow with a checklist: wipe counters, align bottled water exactly, polish surfaces until no one could tell they'd been touched. Fingerprints here like moral failure. The glass was the hardest part. Walls, railings, doors, everything reflected. As she wiped, her image multiplied and vanished. Sometimes it felt like there were 10 versions of her working in silence. None of them named. By 7, the staff arrived. Nia nodded, careful not to seem too familiar. Familiarity will add unless you had money in your veins. Somehow, tasks always slid toward her. Competence made her useful, not visible. On paper, she wasn't even fully listed, just housekeeping, auxiliary. A category, not a person. At 8:30, the air changed. Graham Wycliffe was awake. He descended the stairs in silk and certainty, scrolling his phone, acknowledging staff the way people acknowledged furniture. Halfway down, he stopped and glanced at the glass railing, then at Nia's hands. "Make sure there aren't streaks," he said. "Yes, sir." "No thanks. Just expectation." Graham's power never raised its voice. It lived in small things: misdirected blame, unanswered greetings, perfection treated as standard. When breakfast water displeased him, his gaze slid past the chef and landed on Nia. She fixed it without protest. Responsibility always found her. Throughout the day, she managed what no one noticed: schedules, preferences, tensions. Leadership without the title. They called it helpful. In the laundry room, folding shirts that cost more than her groceries, anger rose quietly. Her phone buzzed. Her brother needed rent help. She typed, "I'll figure it out." She always did. That evening, Graham hosted a small dinner. Guests spoke easily about acquisitions and efficiency, laughing as if their words didn't reshape lives. Nia stood invisible at the edges, adjusting plates, absorbing silence. After the guests left, Graham paused in the foyer. "Where's the envelope from my office?" he asked sharply. "I didn't go into your office," Nia replied, steady. He stepped closer, not threatening, but suspicious. Dangerous in a quieter way. Then someone did. For the first time, he really looked at her. Not as labor, but as a variable. The silence thickened. The glass walls reflected the tension. Graham turned and walked upstairs, but suspicion stayed behind. And as Nia stood alone, tray in hand, she understood something clearly. In this house, she wasn't a person until she was a problem. Upstairs, Graham reached his office door and paused, because from inside, he heard movement, as if someone else was already there. Graham Wycliffe didn't rush into his office. He never rushed. Even suspicion had to wait for composure. He stood at the door, listening, as if authority alone could explain the disturbance. The mansion behind him remained perfectly quiet, the kind of quiet that made any disruption feel like a crime. Inside, the office was dim and immaculate, except for one detail. A desk drawer sat slightly open. Graham closed the door, crossed the room, and pulled it fully out. The envelope was gone. It wasn't fear that tightened his jaw. It was insult. His world did not misbehave without permission. He called security. Briggs arrived minutes later, posture sharpened. "Someone's been in here," Graham said. Cameras were checked. No intruders. Only staff movement. Authorized access. Graham replied coolly. Downstairs, Nia kept cleaning because there was nothing else to do. But the house had changed. The chef avoided her eyes. Security lingered. Suspicion didn't drift in places like this. It chose Briggs returned. Nia was near your office earlier, cleaning the stair railing. Bring her. The order moved through the house like a silent signal. When Briggs found Nia in the laundry room, she was mid-fold, briefly human before authority erased it. In the office, Graham didn't offer her a chair. You were near my office. I was cleaning the railing. You went inside. No, sir. An envelope is missing. I didn't take anything. Graham circled her slowly. You understand what this looks like? What it looks like? Nia said carefully. Depends on who you're looking at. The room tightened. Graham's eyes cooled. Search her bag. Briggs did. Wallet. Phone. Lotion. A worn paperback. Nothing. Then the interruption came through Briggs's earpiece. A page jammed in the printer. A copy of the envelope's contents, not the original. A duplicate. For a moment, Nia thought the truth might matter. But Graham didn't look relieved. He looked angrier. The copy meant someone had accessed it. Someone inside, and still, his gaze returned to her. This isn't nothing, he said. It proves someone printed it, Nia replied. Not that I took it. The difference doesn't matter when I can't trust you. HR arrived quickly. Rachel Dean listened to Graham's version without looking at Nia. We have to protect the household, Rachel said. Not fairness, not facts, protection. Nia! Rachel continued, you're terminated pending review. For what? Nia asked. There's no proof. This isn't criminal, Rachel replied smoothly. It's an employment decision. Clean it. Final. Nia refused to sign the paperwork. Graham dismissed her anyway. Briggs escorted her like a risk. She packed in minutes. Clothes. Book. No room for the cracked alarm clock. When Rachel asked for her badge, there wasn't one. There never had been. Keys were taken. The door closed behind her with a soft, expensive sound outside. The cold hit her face. Cars passed. Life moved on. Nia walked down the long driveway with a bag and nothing else, stopping at the curb to face an empty road. Understanding how easily a person could be erased when the world decided they were only labor. Nia's first night after the mansion was spent on a bus. The shelter she found was already full, its doors closed with practiced sympathy and laminated notices about capacity. She stood on the sidewalk for several minutes with her bag at her feet, watching strangers move past her with purpose. Everyone had somewhere to be. She didn't. The bus was warm, and it moved. That was enough. She paid the fare with the last bills in her wallet and took a seat near the back, bag tucked between her feet like something fragile. As the city slid by, she rested her forehead against the window and let herself breathe. Crying felt like a luxury that required privacy. Morning arrived without ceremony. The driver announced the final stop, and Nia stepped into a neighborhood that smelled like exhaust and wet concrete. She washed her face in a gas-station bathroom, hands trembling under cold water. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself, not because her face had changed, but because the role that had defined her was gone. No uniform. No schedule. No place that pretended to need her. She texted her brother that she couldn't help with rent after all. She didn't explain. Explanations felt like surrender. The days blurred into a rhythm stitched together by necessity. She rented a cheap room in a shared apartment advertised near a laundromat. The landlord asked few questions. The walls were thin, privacy more idea than reality, but she could lock the door. She took whatever work she could find: night office cleaning, weekend catering shifts, hotel laundry that paid under the table and demanded too much. No benefits. No security. Just labor traded for the right to keep breathing. No one called from the mansion. No paper trail followed her. The story ended where it began, in silence. At night, sleep came in pieces. Her mind replayed Graham's gaze, HR's clipped tone, termination spoken like a scheduling change. Sometimes anger surged, other times she felt nothing, a numbness that scared her more than pain. She didn't collapse. She couldn't afford to. Survival became a set of quiet skills, meals built from the cheapest ingredients, buses memorized by their last runs, shampoo stretched, hunger ignored long enough to rest. It didn't feel heroic. It felt repetitive. One afternoon, cleaning an office after hours, she overheard two managers behind glass. She claims she was fired unfairly, one said, scrolling his phone. But there's nothing official. No complaint, no paper trail. The other shrugged. Then it didn't happen. The sentence landed softly and stayed. If there was no record, no noise, then the injury was treated like imagination. On the ride home, Nia stared at her reflection in the dark window and felt something shift, subtle, like a hinge loosening. Waiting to be recognized was another form of dependence. Silence had protected everyone but her. She stopped checking her phone for messages that wouldn't come. Stopped rehearsing explanations no one would ask for. She practiced not apologizing for existing. Practiced letting silence stand without filling it. Slowly, she began rebuilding something she hadn't known she'd lost: authorship. On days off, she went to the public library to study. She'd always been good with systems, timing logistics, anticipating needs. At the mansion, that competence had been hidden under servitude. Now she read business fundamentals, organizational behavior, compliance. She watched free lectures at night, rewinding when her brain tired. She took tight notes in a $1 spiral notebook, unseen on purpose. Then a woman at the hotel laundry, Denise, noticed how Nia reorganized a backlog without being asked. "You ever work management?" Denise asked. Nia said, "No, you should," Denise replied. A week later, Denise mentioned a nonprofit that needed part-time help coordinating schedules, checklists, donor logistics. The pay was modest, the hours uncertain. "You'd have to learn fast," Denise warned, "and you wouldn't be invisible." That night, Nia wrote one line across a fresh page. "I will not build anyone else's stability at the cost of my own." She took the interview. The director asked how she solved problems when resources ran out. Nia answered plainly. She knew how to keep systems from collapsing. No promises were offered. Nia wasn't looking for them. For the first time since the mansion door closed, the risk felt like it belonged to her. That night, reviewing intake forms at her kitchen table, her phone buzzed an unfamiliar alert, a forwarded, confidential document, and a name she recognized: Graham Wycliffe. The nonprofit office didn't look like opportunity. It looked like survival wearing borrowed furniture. Mismatched desks, uneven chairs, a printer that sounded perpetually exhausted. The walls held flyers instead of framed achievements. Nothing pretended to be impressive. And yet, the first day Nia walked in as staff, she felt something unfamiliar settle into her shoulders, not weight, but alignment. She wasn't here to disappear. She was here to function. Her role was small and provisional operations assistant, part-time, no guarantees. She handled scheduling, documentation, and compliance tracking for community organizations run by people one missed deadline away from collapse. Nia understood that pressure. When the director handed her an overstuffed folder and said, almost apologetically, "We've never had anyone who could keep all of this straight," Nia simply nodded and sat down. By week's end, chaos had a system. Deadlines were color-coded, redundancies removed. A quiet order replaced years of confusion. No announcement followed. Just relief. That was enough. At night, she studied. Free certification programs, compliance basics, organizational risk, administrative law. She learned the language once used to erase her: liability, protocol, audit trail, and turned it into armor. Her confidence didn't arrive as defiance. It arrived as precision. Decisions made without hesitation. Answers delivered cleanly. People began deferring to her without noticing they were doing it. Someone asked her to sit in, just in case. Emails meant for leadership included her by default. When confusion surfaced, someone said, "Let's ask Nia." The name carried weight now. She didn't dress differently. Still neutral. Still simple. But she no longer made herself smaller. She took only the space she needed, and no one questioned it. Across town, Graham Wycliffe's life remained intact. The mansion gleamed. The missing envelope incident was buried quietly, contained by non-disclosure and privilege. He replaced Nia within a week. Younger, quieter. He didn't learn her name. Why would he? The role mattered. The person didn't. At dinners and galas, Graham spoke of growth and foresight. His narrative stayed untouched because no one important challenged it. Nia Carter was a closed file. In his mind, she existed only as a faint inconvenience, easily removed. Yet small inefficiencies crept in. Preferences missed. Timing off by minutes. Nothing dramatic, just seams showing. Graham complained. Staff adjusted. No one spoke her name. At the nonprofit, Nia was promoted quietly. No ceremony. Just more responsibility. She was given oversight of a pilot helping minority-owned businesses prepare for regulatory reviews. The work required discretion and an understanding of how power moved without announcing itself. She was good at it. Too good to ignore. One afternoon, reviewing intake documents, she paused at a familiar name: Wycliffe Holdings. The connection emerged slowly: subsidiaries, foundations, funding streams. Her pulse didn't spike. She noted it and kept working. This wasn't collision yet, just proximity. Weeks passed, the pilot expanded. Nia trained volunteers, built frameworks, documented processes. She let the work speak. People listened. At a small regional conference, she presented on compliance readiness. Calm, precise. She explained how institutions failed people through structure, not hostility, how access mattered more than intelligence, how silence could be weapon and shield. When asked where she learned it, she replied, "By being excluded from it." The room stayed quiet, focused. Later, an email arrived inviting her into a larger initiative. Cross-sector partnerships, corporate oversight, real visibility, risky. Exposing. Rooms that once erased her. Nia read it twice. Thought about who she was now. Then replied with a single sentence, "I'm interested. Please share next steps." As she reviewed the project brief, a familiar corporate name appeared again. This time at the center, confirming that the path she was building would soon intersect directly with the man who once decided she didn't exist. Graham Wycliffe did not notice the change immediately. He was not a man who noticed absence. Absence had always worked in his favor. People disappeared from his world all the time: employees, assistants, entire teams, and nothing ever slowed down. Systems absorbed loss. Money smoothed gaps. Silence sealed seams. So when the first issue surfaced, he treated it as inconvenience. A quarterly report arrived 2 days late. Explained away. A donor packet missed an attachment. Sloppy, but correctable. Graham sent sharp reminders, received apologetic replies, and accepted them. Power had trained him to believe friction was temporary and obedience permanent. The cracks widened quietly. A business partner asked why a compliance document had been submitted twice, once incomplete, once corrected. Graham hadn't been copied on either version. He called a meeting. "Who's overseeing document flow now?" he asked. Silence followed. Not long. "Just enough. We redistributed responsibilities after the staffing change," someone said. "Redistributed how?" "We're still refining the structure." Refining. A soft word that meant no one knew who was holding it together. Graham dismissed the meeting, irritated but unconcerned. Transitions always caused turbulence. What he didn't acknowledge was that turbulence usually followed the removal of someone essential, someone whose function had never been formally recognized. At the mansion, the new maid followed instructions perfectly. But instructions weren't enough. Preferences slipped. Timing drifted. The house still functioned, but it no longer anticipated him. Graham found himself checking details he'd never thought about before. The rhythm was gone. That was the first consequence of absence, inconvenience disguised as coincidence. At his company, the consequences were subtler. A regulatory review flagged a minor inconsistency, not punitive. Just questions. More questions than usual, routine, his legal team said. Graham accepted the explanation, but unease lingered. He prided himself on being ahead of scrutiny, not reacting to it. Meanwhile, elsewhere, systems were being built without his awareness. Nia worked quietly within a collaborative initiative linking nonprofits, small businesses, and corporate partners under shared compliance standards. She didn't seek credit. She didn't attach her name. She designed frameworks that didn't rely on favors or exceptions, only documentation and consistency. Organizations felt calmer under her systems, more prepared, less dependent on last-minute intervention. People noticed, though they couldn't always explain why. While reviewing submissions one afternoon, Nia flagged a pattern across multiple organizations tied to the same funding stream. The gaps weren't illegal. Not yet, but they carried risk. She documented it without judgment and forwarded it through the proper channel. The system absorbed the information and moved on. Back in Graham's world, the questions persisted. A journalist requested comment on oversight practices. A regulator scheduled an audit broader than expected. Graham laughed it off publicly, but alone, the neutral tone unsettled him. The system wasn't hostile. It was indifferent. Indifference unnerved him more than opposition ever could. He considered calling someone influential, then didn't. Control mattered too much to appear reactive. He didn't realize control had already shifted. One evening, reviewing an audit framework draft, Nia noticed familiar corporate structures embedded within it. Subsidiaries she recognized. Connections clear if you knew how to read them. She felt no triumph, only confirmation. The system didn't need adjustment. It treated everyone the same. That was its power. At the mansion, Graham stood before the glass wall, watching city lights scatter below. Restless. Observed. He told himself he was imagining things. The next morning, an invitation arrived at a closed-door roundtable on compliance and transparency. Attendance requested. Not celebrated. One agenda item caught his attention: Operational Readiness Framework presentation. No presenter listed. He accepted the invitation, not out of fear, but because something had shifted around him and he needed to see it. Later, a delivery arrived. A summary brief for the roundtable. Clean. Precise. Familiar in a way he couldn't explain. He reread the opening line twice. It didn't accuse. It understood, and for the first time since Nia had left his life, Graham felt the quiet, disorienting sense that something he no longer controlled was approaching, patiently, structurally, without needing permission. The first sign of her return didn't arrive as a warning or a rumor. It came as a calendar invite stamped with authority mandatory. Board attended. Closed session. The subject line was stripped of emotion, governance review, immediate attendance required. Blackwell Capital felt different that morning. Assistants moved softer. Security lingered longer. Conversations shrank. Ethan Blackwell walked through it all with practiced indifference. He didn't do anxiety, but he recognized disruption, the subtle pressure shift when something entered his orbit that didn't revolve around him. The boardroom looked familiar: glass, walnut, restrained power. But the seating had changed. Ethan's chair was no longer at the head. Still prominent, still leather, just adjacent, a small rearrangement, a quiet insult. He smiled and sat slowly, as if time itself waited on him. Directors filed in with nervous warmth. A compliance consultant followed. The general counsel cleared his throat and failed to speak. Then the doors opened again, and the room tightened. She entered without hesitation. Not the woman Ethan half remembered, the one who kept her eyes down, measured her words, wore apology like clothing. This version moved as if the building belonged to her. Her suit assumed respect. Her posture no longer bent for comfort. Her face carried no plea. Their eyes met briefly. Ethan felt a flicker of recognition without context, like reaching for a memory and finding smoke. He knew that face, from beneath fluorescent light, from a corner of his world he'd never bothered to name. But this was a different woman wearing the same skin. She didn't look at him again. She took the seat prepared for her. The nameplate read Interim Board Liaison, Governance Council. Ethan didn't react, but his attention sharpened. No briefing, no warning. Which meant the board had moved without him. The meeting began smoothly. Her credentials were recited, law, compliance, restructuring, translated into language meant to make her presence palatable. But even without it, her authority required no explanation. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud. It was steady. "This won't take long," she said. "But it will require honesty." Honesty landed like a foreign object. She opened a slim folder, clean tabs, precise documents, names listed like variables. Ethan noticed his own halfway down. No one looked to him for permission. "There are patterns," she said calmly, "creating legal, reputational, and cultural exposure. Not culture as branding. Culture as liability." Ethan leaned back. You're here to lecture us on perception. This isn't perception, she replied without looking up. It's documentation. The room stilled. She outlined reviews, hiring practices, exit interviews, arbitration records. Blood without naming it. These agreements were legal, Ethan said when she mentioned non-disclosures. They were, she replied. And they were predictive. Predictive struck harder than accusation. Interviews will follow, she continued. Executive level. Not optional. Ethan searched her face for anger, for grievance. Anything to frame her as emotional. There was nothing. She wasn't returning for closure. She was conducting an audit. Who brought you here? He asked. She finally looked at him calm. Cold. Composed. The board, she said. And shareholders who've been quiet long enough. I'm the majority, Ethan said. She slid a single page across the table. Ownership figures. A trust name he didn't recognize, enough to block him. Enough to force rooms like this. Then she spoke again, softer. A former employee's file has been reopened. She placed another document down, highlighted a name he'd buried. In the margin, his former counsel's handwriting. Keep her quiet. She has connections we can't trace. Ethan looked up at her, recognition finally breaking through. Who are you? He asked. She held his gaze. You're gonna remember. And Ethan Blackwell understood the truth. She hadn't returned for revenge. She had returned with paperwork. And for the first time in his life, he realized the woman he'd erased hadn't come back with a weapon. She had come back with the system. Ethan Blackwell didn't storm out of the boardroom. He rose with the same controlled patience he had always used to end negotiations and ruin competitors politely. Even as he left the chair that was no longer centered, his posture insisted nothing had changed. But the room had already moved on. Directors gathered their papers with rehearsed calm. The general counsel avoided Ethan's eyes, not out of self-preservation. And she, quiet, composed, didn't watch him like a defeated enemy. She watched him like a surgeon watching anesthesia settle. What she had introduced didn't need his permission to exist. In the hallway, his assistant hurried to him. The bank is holding. And, later, Ethan said. He walked past framed magazine covers and gala photos that once reassured him. Today they felt staged, like props from a set already dismantled. In his office, the skyline glittered as always, but the air felt borrowed. He called his attorneys. I need clarity. Who authorized this? A pause too long. The board broadened its scope. They can't. They can, came the careful reply. Under fiduciary duty Ethan said. We're trying. But the bank has concerns. The banker's call was polite, apologetic. We're pausing expansion on your credit line. Temporarily. Ethan understood the translation. Growth choked. Speed lost. Power slowed. The next days unfolded quietly. Meetings rescheduled. Regulators requested routine documentation. Journalists stopped replying. Charity boards spoke about leadership optics. Nothing exploded. Doors simply closed. That was the cruelty of it. No scandal, no public fall, just recalibration. People adjusted in real time. Smiles thinned. Invitations softened. Lauder paused before reaching him. Ethan realized fear didn't always look like flinching. Sometimes it looked like planning for life after you. He requested another meeting with her, through counsel, not directly. Control by proxy. Her response arrived in writing, unavailable. Direct all inquiries to the review committee, no explanation, no emotion, indifference. By week's end, the review became a machine. Interviews. Audits. Old files reopened by people uninterested in intent, only impact. Ethan told himself it was manageable. He had survived worse. But this wasn't a rival. It was a system removing him from its center. Under pressure, memories surfaced. A conference room where someone joked about her name being too hard. His smirk. An elevator where he corrected her tone publicly. Her silence. He'd mistaken it for compliance. Now he heard it as note-taking. Regret didn't arrive as morality. It arrived as nausea, the recognition that dominance wasn't intelligence, and patience wasn't permission. He tried money, donations, promises, goodwill. But liability didn't care. Then his CFO arrived with a folder. We found the trust. The one that acquired the stake. The name wasn't a rival fund. It was his mother's. She had transferred holdings into an independent governance vehicle and appointed a liaison, her. Ethan understood immediately. His mother hadn't attacked him. She had corrected the structure. Love applied without protection. She gave statements, the CFO added, about patterns. About how you treated people you didn't need. After she left, Ethan stared at the city, realizing his downfall wasn't being celebrated because it wasn't entertainment. It was administration. Days reduced him by inches. Contracts lapsed. Committees formed without him. Authority drained without noise. Late one night, an email arrived. A new foundation approved, global, permanent. She was named executive director. At the bottom, Mr. Blackwell is required to attend an executive interview. Refusal will be noted. Another attachment loaded slowly. Her keynote title appeared. The Cost of Silence. When Power Mistakes Patience for Permission. Ethan's breath caught, not because it was about him, but because he couldn't tell anymore whether she would mention his name at all. And that uncertainty felt like the beginning of the end. The foundation's launch wasn't staged in a chandelier ballroom. It happened in a clean auditorium with plain wood accents and a stage built for ideas, not luxury, though cameras arrived anyway, because the world always showed up when it sensed power changing hands. Backstage, she stood anchored while people tried to manage her. A volunteer offered water. An assistant offered talking points. A PR advisor whispered, "Keep it hopeful." She nodded politely, letting them feel useful, but none of it stuck. She had spent too many years being shaped by other people's needs to let praise sculpt her now. Her name sat on the program in bold beside titles that would have sounded unreal in the old Blackwell building: Executive Director, Governance Council, Chair of Reform. But the titles weren't what steadied her. What steadied her was the quiet absence of urgency. She didn't feel the need to prove anything anymore. Through the curtain, she heard the audience hum, polite laughter, seat shifts, people waiting to be inspired. That sound used to trigger memory, mispronounced names, competence treated like surprise, silence mistaken for agreement. Now it was just noise. Breath in, breath out. A board member approached, eyes flicking toward the front row. "He's not here," the board member whispered, as if offering a gift. "He doesn't need to be," she replied. "There are reporters hoping you'll connect it," the board member added. "Let them hope," she said. She wasn't interested in becoming a storyline, victim, survivor, avenger. Just to satisfy an audience's appetite, she glanced through a narrow gap in the curtain and saw rows of faces: investors, journalists, executives calculating risk. In the front row sat someone unexpected, Ethan's mother, alone, hands folded, watching the stage like it mattered, not smiling for the room, witnessing. A staffer signaled time. She stepped onto the stage, and the applause rose quickly, eager approval before challenge. She didn't rush to the microphone. She let the room settle at her pace, the way someone does when they've learned they don't need permission to breathe. "I was advised to make this hopeful," she began, then drawing a small ripple of laughter. Then her tone sharpened without raising volume. "Hope matters. But hope without honesty becomes denial." The room quieted. She didn't name Ethan. She didn't name the company. She spoke about systems, the way harm lived quietly when it didn't become scandal. "The most damaging harm rarely trends," she said. "It gets filed, minimized, joked about, disguised as feedback." She looked across the audience. "Some of you have worked where your name was treated like an inconvenience, where your competence was treated like surprise, where your silence was interpreted as agreement." Discomfort moved through the seats. "I'm not here seeking closure," she continued. "Closure isn't granted. It's built when you stop waiting for permission to be whole." She explained the foundation's purpose: accountability that didn't require performance. "Justice shouldn't depend on rage," she said. "It must be procedural, built into the architecture, so it becomes default, not exception." Applause returned, slower and deeper. Afterward, executives offered partnerships with urgent smiles. A reporter asked if she felt satisfied watching powerful men face consequences. I don't measure my life by someone else's collapse, she replied. Vindication keeps you tied to what hurt you. I'm not staying tied. In a quiet corridor away from cameras, Ethan's mother approached without encourage. I wanted to see you, she said. Why? She asked. Because I should have done it sooner, the older woman admitted. The seeing. The naming. They spoke briefly about goodness as repeated behavior, about change that couldn't undo but could prevent repetition. When asked if she wanted to speak to Ethan, she answered simply, if I speak to him, it becomes about him again. That evening, she left through a side exit, not out of fear, but disinterest. At home, she made tea in a life built deliberately, not as compensation but as home. Late, an unknown number texted 6 words he asked. For your file back, she didn't call. She didn't need to. But the world, quietly, was about to learn what Ethan would do next.